Hello, welcome to the fourth edition of our video history of Leicester City Football Club as told through its memorabilia and its archives. We left the story at the end of last week at the beginning of the 1920s with the newly reconstructed Leicester City managed by Peter Hutch signing key players such as Arthur Chandler for a club record fee of £3,000. Chandler can be seen here just before he signed for Leicester with his Queen's Park Rangers teammates meeting fans on the afternoon of a game. The club was also developing off the pitch too. The old wooden Foss main stand was demolished and replaced in 1921 by an impressive steel structure which can be seen in these pictures here. You can see the old Foss stand in the bottom left hand corner of the picture. You can also see in the distance the old stand which was soon to be replaced by the double decker. In December 1923 there was a general election in Britain, and the candidate for Leicester West was Winston Churchill, who in those days was a Liberal. Here you can see him on December the 1st, 1923, being introduced to the Leicester City side before their game against South Shields, a second division game against South Shields. He's standing next to Arthur Chandler, who scored a hat-trick in a 4-0 win in that game. Whilst he was in Leicester, he was chauffeured around in this luxury Belgian 8-cylinder car called a Minerva, which was owned by Arthur Needham, one of the directors of the club, a boot and shoe manufacturer in Leicester. 1924-1925 was a big season for Leicester City. They got promoted as second division champions to the top flight. On Christmas Day 1924, they beat Port Vale 7-0 and Johnny Duncan, the captain, scored 6 successive goals in a 7-0 victory, and the match ball from that game is on display in the reception area at King Power Stadium. Following that game, the club went on to win 13 and draw 2 of the next 15 games and went up as deserved champions. Their final game of the season was on May the 2nd, 1925, but 2 days before that they played a game against the top Scottish side, Airdrieonians, managed by a man called Willie Orr, more of whom later, and they then had a dinner on the Friday before the last game of the season, rather surprising this, at the Grand Hotel in Leicester, and we have the menu from that dinner here. On the back of the menu are the autographs of the Airdrieonian side. One to notice is Hugh Gallagher, who became one of the biggest stars in football in the 1920s. Soon after this dinner, in fact, he signed for Newcastle United, where he made a big name for himself. To commemorate the club's promotion, they produced a souvenir booklet. You can see the cover of that here. It's typical 1920s design, and inside are many pages including pictures of the team, and there's also a feature of on the manager Peter Hutch, which you can see here. A couple of days later there was an awards dinner, and here we have the menu for that awards dinner, where the medals were presented to the victorious side. The gold medal that Adam Black received that evening is on display in reception area at King Power Stadium, and also the Black family showed us a watch which Adam owned, which also commemorated this promotion, or this championship, this title, by having pictures of the players around the circumference of the watch face. In readiness for life in the First Division, Leicester City, during the close season, extended their main stand, which had been built in 1921, so that it ran the full length of the pitch. And here we have the architect's drawings showing part of the plan for that extension. The season didn't start off too badly, and in October 1925 Johnny Duncan was capped for Scotland, and here you can see him resplendent in his Scottish cap and Scottish shirt, and his cap and his shirt badge are on display in the reception area of King Power Stadium. In order to strengthen the side, Peter Hutch made 3 key signings. One was the goalkeeper from Stoke, Kenny Campbell. These signings all came quite early on in the season. The second was Arthur Lochhead from Manchester United, and the third was Ernie Hine from Barnsley. Now, Lochhead and Hine in particular were hugely significant signings for the club. Hine is third in the club's all-time goal-scoring records, and until Jamie Vardy overtook him recently, Arthur Lockhead was fifth in the all-time goal-scoring records. And bearing in mind the side had got Chandler playing as well, you can see what a formidable side Leicester City were. Leicester City finished their first season back in the top flight in 17th position, and that summer, much to the club's disappointment really, Peter Hutch decided to leave Leicester City, to leave Filbert Street, to become manager of Manchester City. He was replaced by Willie Orr. Now, Willie Orr had been the very successful manager of Airdrieonians up in Scotland. The previous 4 seasons, he'd taken them to 4 successive runners-up spots. He, of course, had been the manager of the Airdrieonian side when they came for that dinner that we mentioned earlier in the film at the Grand Hotel. Willie Orr was very successful at Leicester City. In his first season, the club finished 7th. The following season they finished 3rd, and the season after that they finished 2nd runners-up in the whole Football League. Leicester City players were beginning to show the trappings of fame. This particular photograph here is of a charity match between the Leicester Police and the Leicester Parsons. This was one of many benefit matches that were played in those days, and here you can see a very fashionably dressed and expensively dressed group of Leicester City staff and players watching this game. Going from left to right, you've got Johnny Duncan, you've got Adam Black, you've got Teddy King, who we mentioned a couple of films ago, you've got Arthur Chandler, the chap in the cap, the elderly chap in the cap is the masseur, Bill Fox. He had been blinded during the Boer War, in fact, and the man at the end in the bowler hat is Bill Findlay. And this is just an interesting sort of social comment really on the fact that although players weren't well paid by today's standards, they nevertheless were comfortably well off, as their clothes indicate. That season, Arthur Chandler was a very successful goal scorer again. He scored a total of 29 League and Cup goals that season, and he was rewarded towards the end of the season in March 1927 by being selected for the Football League against the Scottish League in a game that actually took place at Filbert Street. Willie Orr's second season as manager of Leicester City was extremely successful. They finished 3rd in the old First Division. He strengthened the side by signing Notts County winger Len Barry for a club record fee of £3,450. Barry went on to represent England at the end of the season. And another Leicester City player, Reg Osborne, was also picked for England that season. Now, this increase in status in the club meant the ground had to be developed, and the decision was taken to demolish the old south stand of the ground, seen here, and replace it with a double-decker. The roof from the south stand of the ground was to be taken and put on the Filbert Street open terracing. That was the plan. The double-decker can be seen in this next picture being built. It's an aerial photograph, and you can see the roof of the double-decker only half completed. Interestingly, you can see the main stand, which had only been built 6 years previously, with the markings on the roof indicating the extensions that we mentioned in 1925, and the newly positioned roof on the Filbert Street end from the old south stand can also be seen in this photograph. The double-decker opened on November the 26th, 1927, which was 6 years to the day after the original section of the old main stand was opened. It was a game against Newcastle United. Leicester City won 3-0. Chandler scored twice, Lockhead scored once, and it was an interesting game and a significant game because it was the first time BBC Radio had broadcast live from Filbert Street. Less than 3 months after the opening of this double-decker stand, the newly expanded Filbert Street was really put to the test. On the 18th of February 1928, 47,298 people crammed into the Filbert Street ground to watch a 5th round FA Cup tie against Tottenham Hotspur. This is the biggest crowd ever to have watched a football match in Leicester. Another 5,000 people were outside trying to get in. They were locked out. Mounted police had to be called in order to prevent them from storming the ground. Now, this afternoon has been captured in a remarkable panoramic photograph which we can see here. On the left of the photograph you can see the new double-decker stand. The photograph was taken at the moment of kick-off. You can see the players on the pitch. So on the left of the picture you can see the new double-decker stand. In the centre of the picture is the 6-year-old main stand with its extensions either side. On the right of the picture is the Filbert Street end with its new roof, which had been taken from the pre-double-decker stand at the other end of the ground. And on the roof, amazingly, and it's probably the most amazing football crowd picture I've ever seen, there are hundreds of people sitting on the roof trying to get a view of the game. Must have been a health and safety nightmare. The next picture shows the extent, or the extremes rather, to which some fans would go to try and get into the game. There's a fan here sort of abseiling down a telegraph wire into the ground from Filbert Street. Opposite the main stand was the Grasmere Street side of the ground, which later became the Burnmore side street of the ground, and there you can see the uncovered terraces with thousands of fans crammed into the crammed onto the terraces. These were actually Tottenham Hotspur fans. What is remarkable about, well, there are all sorts of remarkable things about these pictures. The lack of stewards. There's a couple of policemen, probably a St John's ambulance person. There is a mounted policeman, but it really was a truly historic afternoon in the football club history. It was all a bit of an anticlimax for Leicester City fans, however, because despite Leicester riding high in the table and Tottenham getting relegated at the end of the season, Tottenham Hotspur won the game 3-0. The 1928-29 season was the most successful season in the club's history until they won the Premier League in 2016. It didn't start off brilliantly. When this photograph was taken in September 1928, the team was only 14th in the table, but they then signed a classy left half from Falkirk in Scotland called George Ritchie, seen here leapfrogging over a teammate in training at Filbert Street, and he influenced the side to such an extent that they started to rise up the table. A big highlight of the season was in October 1928 when Leicester City recorded a 10-0 win over Portsmouth, a record top-flight win for the club which still stands today. On that day, Arthur Chandler scored 6 goals, Ernie Hine scored 3, and Len Barry scored 1. The game is famous in the club's folklore because it's known as the Six Swans game. After Chandler scored his 5th, 5 swans flew over the Filbert Street pitch. Then a 6th straggling swan flew over. The crowd called for a 6th goal, and Chandler duly scored his 6th goal. The afternoon was captured in this Geary cartoon in the Leicester Mail, which makes all sorts of allusions to what happened that day, linking it with the fact that it was the Harvest Festival season. 2 days after this, Ernie Hine, Chandler and Hine between them scored 66 goals that season. Hine was selected for his first cap for England. The cap here was his 6th and final cap, which he won in 1931 and which is on display at King Power Stadium. The title race went right down to the penultimate game of the season. For Leicester to win the title, they had to beat Huddersfield away. Huddersfield were a top side in those days. They were only able to draw, and they blew their chance, which meant they could only finish second. The final match of the season was the following week, which they did win. They came second to Sheffield Wednesday in the table. On the night before that game, the players attended a function at De Montfort Hall, which welcomed the South African cricket team and also George Geary, who was Leicestershire's England cricketing star. It's surprising that on the evening before important games, the players were attending these social functions. After such a successful season, it was hardly surprising that Leicester City players were beginning to be selected for international recognition. Leicester's right wing, Hugh Adcock, and left wing, Len Barry, were chosen to play for England on their close season tour to France, Belgium and Spain. Adcock played in all 3 games, Barry played against France and Belgium. In our club's collection we have Hugh Adcock's passport for this trip. It's got the traditional cover, as you can see. It's got his photograph and personal details inside. You can see he was quite a small chap really. And also, and this is unusual by today's standards, the countries that he was entitled to travel to have been written by hand in the passport. These were the only countries that the holder of this passport could go to before the expiry date. Hugh Adcock went on to win 5 caps for England, and he also represented the Football League against Scotland. In those days, England caps varied in colour depending on the opposition. Here we have his 5 England caps together at the front with his Football League cap, which he won when he was selected for the English League against the Scottish League in November 1929, early, into the next season. And we also have in the club's collection his shirt crest from that game. 2 other Leicester City players who received international recognition in the summer of 1929 were Arthur Chandler and South African-born England international Reg Osborne. They were chosen to go on the FA tour of South Africa and Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. The tour consisted of 17 games, including 3 test matches against South Africa and Rhodesia. And in the club's collection we have a remarkable collection of photographs and newspapers from Arthur Chandler's own personal collection, which is now at the club. 2 of the photographs show him training on the SS Arundel on the journey out to South Africa. It was an extremely successful tour for Chandler. In the 16 games that he played out of the 17, he scored an incredible 33 goals, and the South African press billed him as the best centre forward who had ever gone to South Africa. It wasn't such a good tour for Reg Osborne because he was hampered by injury. Another photograph from Arthur Chandler's collection is the crowd at one of the test matches at Port Elizabeth in South Africa. There are lots of other photographs too, charting his journey through South Africa and Rhodesia. On display in reception at King Power Stadium we have Arthur Chandler's shirt crest, which we can see here, and also his cap, his FA cap from that tour. And we'll finish with one of the many newspaper cuttings that Arthur kept relating to one of the games that he played. So that really concludes the story of Leicester City in the 1920s, a decade in which they finished on an amazing high, runners up in the old First Division. Next time we'll look at the 1930s. These were incident-packed, and of course that decade ended with the outbreak of the Second World War. Until next week then, take care. Look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.